Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a feeling that every living creature in the galaxy shares, though most would never think to name it. It is the quiet warmth of simply existing, the low hum of consciousness that connects every sentient mind to the vast ocean of energy that flows beneath reality. You feel it right now, even if you do not know it. It is the gentle pulse of your awareness, the weight of your thoughts pressing ever so lightly against the fabric of something greater than yourself. Every human who has ever lived has carried this invisible thread, this tether between their mind and the dimension that scholars call the Imperium. Most people never notice it. Most people go about their lives, breathing and thinking and dreaming, completely unaware that their very existence leaves a flickering imprint upon the sea of souls that churns beneath the skin of the material universe. But in the far future, in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium and beyond, there exists a galaxy in which this connection between flesh and spirit is not merely a philosophical curiosity. It is a matter of survival. It is the foundation upon which empires rise and fall, the fuel that powers the great beacon that guides humanity's ships through the howling void, and the raw material from which gods of unimaginable cruelty fashion their nightmares. And there are those who are born without it entirely. Imagine for a moment what it would be like to walk through a crowded room and feel every person around you recoil, not from something you have said, not from the way you look or the clothes you wear, but from something fundamental about what you are. Imagine that your mere presence fills the people near you with a creeping sense of dread, a gut-deep wrongness that they cannot explain, but cannot ignore. Imagine that your mother looked at you when you were born and felt not love, but revulsion. That the other children on your world avoided you not because you were cruel or strange, but because standing near you felt like standing on the edge of a bottomless pit. Imagine that you grew up knowing, in the most absolute terms possible, that you were utterly and irreversibly alone. Not because no one wanted to be near you, but because the universe itself had made you wrong. You were born with a hole where your soul should have been, and that hole was not merely empty, it was hungry. It pulled at the edges of reality, drinking in the light that other people carried within them and leaving nothing in its wake but a cold, aching darkness. This is what it means to be a blank. This is what it means to carry the pariah gene. And this is the raw material from which the Imperium of man forges its most terrible weapon. Tonight, we are going to talk about the Culexus assassins. They are the rarest operatives of the Officio Assassinorum, the Imperium's shadowy bureau of state-sanctioned killers. They are the witch-bane, the weird slayers, the psychic abominations. They are beings so profoundly wrong, so fundamentally alien to the nature of life itself, that even the ancient Aeldari, a species whose entire civilization is built upon psychic mastery, have described them as nothing less than the embodiments of pure evil. Not because they are malicious, not because they choose cruelty, but because they represent something that should not exist, a living void in a universe defined by connection. The Culexus assassins do not carry guns, at least not in the traditional sense. They do not wield power swords, or employ the subtle poisons of their sister temples. They do not need to. A Culexus assassin is a weapon in and of itself, a walking negation of everything that the warp represents. Their very existence is anathema to psychers, to demons, to any creature that draws its strength from the churning tides of the Imperium. When a Culexus assassin walks onto a battlefield, the psychic temperature drops to absolute zero. Witches scream and claw at their own skulls. Demons flicker and fade like candle flames caught in a hurricane. Even ordinary soldiers feel their courage drain away, but replaced by a cold, primal dread that whispers to them from the oldest and most primitive parts of their brains. Something is coming, and it is wrong, and you cannot stop it. There is a moment, recounted in countless after-action reports and debriefing transcripts across the Imperium, that repeats itself with eerie consistency whenever soldiers describe their experience of a Culexus assassin operating in their vicinity. The soldiers do not describe seeing the assassin. They do not describe hearing it approach. What they describe, almost without exception, is a feeling, a creeping, sourceless certainty that something was wrong with the world, as though the fundamental laws that governed reality had been quietly rewritten without anyone's permission. Colors seemed to dim, sounds became muffled as though heard through layers of thick cloth. Yet the air itself felt heavier, denser, saturated with a cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the sudden, inexplicable absence of something that should have been there but was not. And then, in the periphery of their vision, a shape. Not a person, not a machine, not anything that their training had prepared them to identify and respond to. Just a shape, a silhouette that seemed to flicker at the edge of perception. There one moment and gone the next, like a retinal afterimage that refused to fade. Some soldiers described trying to look directly at it and finding that their eyes would not cooperate, that their gaze kept sliding off the shape like water off oiled metal, drawn away to focus on anything else, anything at all as long as it was not that. And others described a profound reluctance to acknowledge its existence, a deep animal instinct that insisted with absolute conviction that whatever they were seeing was not really there, and that the wisest course of action was to ignore it and move on. The veterans, the ones who had survived enough campaigns to recognize the signs, knew what that feeling meant. They knew that somewhere nearby, a Culexus assassin was at work, and they knew that the best thing they could do, the only thing they could do, was stay out of its way and pray that the void it carried within it was pointed at someone else. To understand the Culexus, we need to understand the world they inhabit and the forces that make them so uniquely terrifying. We need to go deeper than the surface-level description of psychic blanks and anti-psycho weaponry. Well, we need to understand what the warp actually is, how it connects to every living being in the galaxy, and what happens when that connection is not merely severed, but actively reversed. Because the Culexus assassins are not simply soldiers. They are philosophical questions made flesh, walking contradictions in a universe where the line between physical matter and spiritual energy has never been more blurred or more dangerous. So settle in, breathe deeply. Let the ambient hum of whatever room you are in fade to the background. We have a long journey ahead of us tonight, from the sunless fortress where these assassins are kept between missions to the blood-soaked battlefields where they ply their terrible trade. Along the way, we are going to explore the nature of souls, the architecture of the Imperium, the secret history of the Officio Assassinorum, and the lonely, nightmarish lives of the rarest killers in the galaxy. This is the story of the Culexus assassins, and it begins, as all stories in this universe must, with the warp, the sea of souls, understanding the warp and the thread of connection. Before we can understand what makes the Culexus assassins so profoundly dangerous, we need to spend some time in a place that most sane people would rather avoid entirely. We need to talk about the warp, that roiling, churning dimension of pure psychic energy that exists alongside and beneath the material universe like a vast and turbulent ocean lying just beneath a frozen lake. Every step you take in the real world sends ripples through its surface. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every prayer you whisper into the darkness adds its weight to the currents that sweep through the Immaterium's endless depths. The warp is not simply an alternate dimension in the way that science fiction often portrays such things. It is not a parallel universe with its own stars and planets and peoples. It is something far stranger and far more intimate than that. The warp is emotion given form. It is the collected psychic residue of every sentient being that has ever lived, ever dreamed, ever feared, ever hoped. Billions upon billions of minds, across millions of worlds, across tens of thousands of years of recorded history, all contributing their tiny drops of psychic energy to this vast and bottomless sea. And that sea is alive. not alive in the way that you or I are alive, what with beating hearts and breathing lungs and the warmth of blood in our veins. Alive in the way that a storm is alive, in the way that a forest fire is alive, in the way that a rogue wave building in the deep ocean is alive. The warp is a thing of motion and appetite and terrible, mindless hunger. Now, here is the crucial piece of information that makes the Culexus assassins possible and necessary. Every human being, every Eldari, every orc, every sentient creature in the galaxy possesses a connection to the warp. This connection is what most cultures call the soul. It is the psychic fingerprint that your mind leaves upon the Imperium, the tiny beacon of awareness that marks your existence in the spiritual dimension. For the vast majority of people, this connection is so faint as to be functionally invisible. You go about your life, you think your thoughts, you feel your feelings, and your soul generates a tiny, barely perceptible glow in the warp that is indistinguishable from the background noise of the billions of other souls around you. But for some people, this connection is not faint at all. For some people, the thread that binds them to the warp is thick and bright and blazing with energy. These people are psychers, and they can reach across the veil between dimensions and draw upon the raw power of the Imperium to reshape the material world. A psyker can reach into your mind and pull your thoughts from your skull like a surgeon extracting a tumor. A psyker can summon fire from nothing, hurl lightning from their fingertips, glimpse the future in the patterns of the warp's churning currents. The most powerful psychers can bend reality itself, folding space and time like paper, opening doorways between worlds, and channeling enough destructive force to level entire cities. The Imperium of Man classifies psychers on a scale known as the assignment, and the range of that scale stretches from the barely perceptible to the almost godlike. At the very top of the scale, at the level known as Alpha Plus, you find beings of such phenomenal psychic power that they represent existential threats to the worlds around them. These are individuals whose mere presence can cause spontaneous psychic phenomena, whose emotions can trigger warp storms, whose anger can crack the foundations of reality itself. The Emperor of Mankind himself is often cited as the most powerful psyker ever to have lived, a being whose psychic might was sufficient to project the Astronomicon across the entire galaxy, illuminate tens of thousands of light years of space with a single sustained act of will, and hold shut the gates of the webway against the combined fury of the chaos gods. But the assignment does not only measure power on the positive side. The scale extends downward, past the baseline of normal humanity, past the point of zero psychic connection, into territory that most people would rather not think about. At the extreme lower end of the assignment, in the classifications designated Phi Plus through the extraordinarily rare Omega Minus, you find the blanks. The scale itself is worth understanding in some detail, because it provides the framework within which the Culexus assassin's power is measured and deployed. At the Phi Plus level, you find individuals who are mildly psychically inert, people whose connection to the warp is so faint that it registers as marginally below the human average. These individuals might cause mild discomfort in the people around them, a vague sense of unease that is easily dismissed and rarely noticed. They are not truly blanks in any operational sense. They are simply people whose spiritual footprint is smaller than most. Below them, at the Sigma and Tau levels, the effect becomes more pronounced. Individuals at these levels generate a noticeable dampening effect on psychic activity in their immediate vicinity. Psychers working near them might find their powers slightly diminished, their concentration harder to maintain, their connection to the warp subtly impeded. These individuals are sometimes recruited by the Inquisition's Order Hereticus, which deploys them as psychic dampeners during interrogations of suspected witches, or as bodyguards for senior officials who are concerned about psychic assassination. At the Upsilon and further lower levels, the effect crosses a threshold that transforms it from a mild inconvenience into a genuine weapon. Individuals at these levels generate a null field that is strong enough to cause visible distress in psychers, to disrupt minor warp phenomena, and to make even non-psychers deeply uncomfortable within their radius of influence. These are the individuals who attract the attention of both the Sisters of Silence and the Culexus Temple, though the Temple is primarily interested in those at the very bottom of the scale. At the Omega- level, the absolute floor of the assignment scale, yet you find the individuals who are sometimes called true pariahs or untouchables in the strictest sense of the term. These are beings whose void is so profound, so absolute, that their mere existence represents a genuine threat to the fabric of the Imperium in their local area. A single Omega- blank can create a zone of psychic dead space that extends for dozens of meters in every direction, a sphere within which no psychic power functions, no demon can manifest, no warp energy can exist. These are the individuals that the Culexus Temple prizes above all others, the raw material from which its most powerful operatives are forged. The difference between a Phi Plus and an Omega- blank is not merely one of degree. It is a difference in kind, as profound as the difference between a candle and a star. And it is this difference that makes the identification and recruitment of suitable Culexus candidates so extraordinarily difficult and so extraordinarily important. And this is where everything changes. A blank is not simply a person who lacks psychic ability. There are plenty of people in the galaxy who will never manifest so much as a hint of witch sight or precognition. A blank is something far more profound and far more disturbing. A blank is a person whose connection to the warp does not merely read as zero, it reads as negative. Where a normal person has a tiny, flickering flame of psychic presence, and a psyker has a blazing torch, a blank has a void, a hole, an absence so complete and so wrong that it warps the fabric of the immaterium around it, like a stone dropped into still water, except that instead of creating ripples, it creates a sinkhole. Psychic energy near a blank does not simply fail to reach them, it is actively drawn toward them and annihilated, consumed by the yawning emptiness that occupies the space where their soul should be. Think about that for a moment. In a universe where every living thing radiates a psychic presence, where the collected warmth of sentient minds forms the very substance of an entire dimension, a blank is a cold spot, a dead zone, a patch of absolute spiritual darkness in an ocean of light, and everything around that cold spot can feel it, not consciously, not rationally, but deep in the oldest and most instinctive parts of their brains, in the ancient animal circuitry that still whispers warnings about predators lurking in the tall grass. Being near a blank makes your skin crawl, it makes your stomach tighten. It makes you want to leave, to put distance between yourself and this thing that your psychic senses are screaming at you is fundamentally wrong. For non-psychers, this effect is uncomfortable but manageable. You might describe a blank you met as having terrible body odor, or being unbearably rude, or possessing some indefinable quality that simply makes you want to be elsewhere. Your conscious mind, unable to process the psychic nature of your discomfort, invents mundane explanations for why this person fills you with unease. But for psychers, the experience is categorically different. For a psyker, being near a blank is like staring into the heart of a black hole. It is agony, the connection to the warp that defines their very identity, that gives them their powers and their purpose and their sense of self, yet is being actively ripped away from them. Their abilities fade, their minds fill with static, and they are gripped by a terror so fundamental, so bone deep, that it can drive even the most disciplined practitioners of the psychic arts into screaming, convulsing breakdowns. And for daemons, for the entities of pure warp energy that infest the immaterium like parasites in a living host, the effect is worse still. A demon cannot exist in the presence of a blank. The psychic energy that gives them form, that allows them to manifest in real space, that sustains their very consciousness, is sucked away and nullified. A powerful enough blank can simply erase a demon from existence, not by fighting it, not by overpowering it, but by simply being there. The demon's form unravels, its consciousness dissipates, and it is cast back into the formless currents of the warp with no memory of what destroyed it. To a demon, a blank is not merely dangerous. A blank is invisible, a hole in reality that the demon cannot perceive, cannot comprehend, and cannot defend against. This is the foundation upon which the Culexus assassins are built. Not skill, though they possess it. Not training, though they have endured years of grueling preparation. Not technology, though they are equipped with some of the most exotic and powerful wargear in the Imperium's arsenal. The Culexus assassins are built upon absence. They are weapons forged from nothing, killers whose deadliest attribute is the thing they lack. And in a galaxy where the greatest threats to humanity are increasingly psychic in nature, where demonic incursions threaten world after world, where chaos sorcerers and Aeldari warlocks and orc psychers and tyrannid hive tyrants command powers that can shatter armies and corrupt entire civilizations, the value of a living anti-psychic weapon cannot be overstated. But the raw material for these weapons is vanishingly rare, and the process of finding it, of refining it, of shaping it into something that can be deployed on the battlefield without destroying everything around it, is a story in itself. One that begins with a genetic anomaly so uncommon that it appears in perhaps one individual out of every billion births, a mutation so poorly understood that even the Emperor of mankind placed a moratorium on research into its origins after early experiments ended in catastrophe. The pariah gene, a curse written in blood. The gene itself goes by many names. Scholars call it the pariah gene, though this is something of a misnomer, since it is unclear whether a single gene is actually responsible for the condition, or whether the effect is produced by a complex interaction of multiple genetic factors that modern imperial science has simply been unable to untangle. Regardless of its precise biological mechanism, the result is always the same. An individual who possesses this mutation is born without any connection whatsoever to the warp. They are, in the most literal sense that the term can carry, soulless. Now, it is worth pausing here to acknowledge that the concept of soullessness is a deeply contested one, even within the fictional framework of the Warhammer universe. Some scholars within the Imperium argue that blanks do possess souls, but that those souls exist in a fundamentally different relationship to the warp than those of normal humans. Rather than projecting outward, radiating psychic energy into the immaterium, a blank's soul is inverted, turned inward, creating a void that actively consumes the psychic energy around it. This interpretation would make blanks less like empty vessels and more like black holes, possessing mass and substance, but expressing those qualities in a way that is the precise opposite of everything around them. Others take a more literal view and argue that blanks are truly without souls, that the pariah gene somehow prevents the formation of the psychic imprint that every other sentient being carries, leaving them as biological machines operating without the spiritual component that defines life in a warp-infused galaxy. The truth, if there is one, remains beyond the reach of imperial science. The Emperor himself put a stop to research into the pariah gene during the early years of the Great Crusade, after experiments conducted by the Imperial Architechnologist Corps and the Mechanicum ended in what the historical records cryptically describe as disaster. What the precise nature of that disaster was remains unclear, but it was severe enough to convince the Master of Mankind that some questions were better left unanswered, at least for the time being. What we do know is this: the pariah gene manifests extremely rarely. The most commonly cited figure is one individual per billion, though some sources suggest it may be even rarer than that. This staggering rarity, combined with the social consequences of carrying the gene, it means that the population of active blanks at any given time is vanishingly small. Most people born with the pariah gene do not live long enough to be identified by anyone who might put their abilities to use. They are outcasts from birth, rejected by their families, shunned by their communities, and frequently killed by the very people who should have protected them. Consider the life of a child born with the pariah gene on an average imperial world. From the moment of their birth, something is wrong. The mother does not feel the rush of love and connection that typically accompanies childbirth. Instead, she feels a cold, hollow sensation, a wrongness that she cannot name but cannot ignore. The baby does not cry in a way that elicits sympathy. Its wails sound wrong, feel wrong, as in a way that bypasses rational thought entirely and triggers something primal and fearful in every person who hears them. As the child grows, the effect intensifies. Other children avoid them instinctively. Adults make excuses not to be in the same room. The child's parents, unable to articulate why their own offspring fills them with such profound discomfort, begin to attribute their feelings to more understandable causes. The child is difficult, they say, disobedient, strange, unnatural. In many cases, this social rejection escalates to violence. On feral worlds and more primitive imperial colonies, children who carry the pariah gene are sometimes killed outright, murdered by their own families or communities in acts that the perpetrators describe with the language of justified self-defense, as though they were putting down a dangerous animal rather than ending a human life. On more civilized worlds, the child might simply be abandoned, left at the gates of a schola progenium, or turned over to the ecclesiarchy's orphanages, where their presence continues to unsettle everyone around them, but where at least there are protocols in place for dealing with unusual wards. The psychological damage inflicted by this lifelong rejection is difficult to overstate. Imagine growing up knowing that you are fundamentally incapable of forming the kinds of bonds that other people take for granted. Imagine that every handshake makes the other person flinch. Every conversation is shadowed by the other person's barely concealed desire to be somewhere else. Every attempt at friendship is sabotaged by an instinctive revulsion that neither you nor the other person can control or explain. This is the daily reality of a blank, and it is a reality that shapes every aspect of their psychological development. Some blanks learn to mask their effect to a degree, suppressing their null aura through sheer force of will or through behavioral adaptations that allow them to function in human society without triggering the worst of the instinctive reactions that their presence provokes. These individuals may live relatively normal lives, though the term normal is always relative. They may find partners willing to tolerate their disquieting presence, may hold down jobs, may even raise families of their own, passing the pariah gene down to future generations, in whom it may or may not fully express. But even the most well-adjusted blank carries the knowledge that they are fundamentally different from everyone around them, that the universe itself has placed them outside the circle of ordinary human experience in a way that can never be fully bridged. Others are not so fortunate. The most powerful blanks, those whose null aura is strong enough to cause physical symptoms in the people around them, often find themselves hunted. On worlds where the imperial creed holds sway, they may be denounced as witches or heretics. A grim irony, given that they are the precise opposite of the psychers that the ecclesiarchy claims to despise. On worlds where psychic traditions are respected, they may be viewed as cursed or polluted, beings who bring misfortune and spiritual decay wherever they go. Even on worlds where the pariah gene is dimly understood, the bearers of that gene are rarely welcomed. At best, they are tolerated. At worst, they are exterminated. This is the pool from which the Culexus temple draws its recruits. Children and adolescents who have spent their entire lives being told, in 1,000 different ways, that they are wrong. Outcasts who have never known acceptance, never known warmth, never known the simple human comfort of being touched without the other person flinching away. It is a pool that is both incredibly small and incredibly damaged. And the process of transforming these broken, rejected individuals into the deadliest anti-psycho operatives in the galaxy is neither quick nor kind. It is worth taking a moment here to consider how the pariah gene interacts with different species across the galaxy. Well, because this interaction is central to understanding why the Culexus assassins are so feared not merely by their fellow humans but by the entire galactic community. The Eldari, as we have already mentioned, are a species whose civilization is built upon psychic mastery. Every Eldari possesses a powerful psychic connection to the warp, far stronger than that of even the most gifted human psyker. Their farseers, their warlocks, their spirit seers, all of them wield psychic power as naturally as a human wields their hands. The Eldari's art, their technology, their architecture, their warfare, all of it is infused with psychic energy at the most fundamental level. To the Eldari, encountering a blank is not merely uncomfortable, it is existentially threatening. The null aura of a powerful blank does not merely disrupt an Eldari's psychic abilities, it attacks the very foundation of their identity, their sense of self, their connection to the universe that gives their existence meaning. Eldari warlocks have described Culexus assassins as embodiments of pure evil, and while this description might seem hyperbolic to a human observer, from the Eldari perspective, it is an understatement. A Culexus assassin is not merely an enemy, it is an abomination, a walking negation of everything that the Eldari hold sacred. The Orcs, by contrast, are affected by the pariah gene in a way that is more subtle but no less significant. Orcs are, in a sense, a psychic species, though they do not practice psychic disciplines in the way that the Eldari or humans do. Was the collective psychic field generated by large groups of Orcs, sometimes called the Gestalt field, is a phenomenon that subtly bends reality in accordance with Orc belief. If enough Orcs believe that a particular vehicle should go faster, it does. If enough Orcs believe that a particular gun should shoot harder, it does. This is not conscious psychic manipulation. It is an unconscious, species-wide psychic effect that underpins virtually every aspect of Orc society and warfare. A blank deployed among Orcs disrupts this field, undermining the unconscious psychic consensus that holds Orc technology together and keeps Orc society functioning. The effect is often more practical than dramatic. Weapons jam, vehicles stall, the Orcs themselves become confused and disorganized, their natural psychic cohesion disrupted by the presence of a void that their collective consciousness cannot compensate for. The Tyranids present perhaps the most interesting case study. The Tyranid hive mind, that vast and alien intelligence that directs the activities of every organism in a Tyranid swarm, is itself a psychic phenomenon of staggering scale and complexity. Every Tyranid creature, from the smallest ripper to the largest biotitan, is connected to the hive mind through a psychic link that provides them with direction, coordination, and purpose. Sever that link, and the individual creature is reduced to a mindless animal, driven only by instinct and incapable of the coordinated action that makes the Tyranid swarm so deadly. A Culexus assassin deployed against a Tyranid force can create exactly this effect, generating a zone of psychic dead space within which the hive mind's control is nullified, and the Tyranid organisms within that zone revert to their baseline animal behavior. Even the most powerful Tyranid psyker organisms, the hive tyrants, whose connection to the hive mind is the strongest and most deeply rooted, are not immune to this effect.
Honestly, this is the part of the lore that gets me every time. Out of everything in 40k, the Culexus is the faction that genuinely unsettles me the most. Not the chaos stuff, not the Tyranids eating whole planets. It's the idea of someone who just cancels you out, not overpowers you, not outfights you, just walks up and you stop existing. There's something about that concept that hits differently. And I think Games Workshop kind of buried the lead with these guys for years. They were always this niche pick on the tabletop that people brought out against Grey Knights or Thousand Suns. But the actual lore behind them is some of the best horror writing in the entire setting. The fact that they're born hated, raised alone, turned into weapons, and then stored in a freezing fortress on a sunless moon between jobs, that's not a power fantasy, that's a tragedy. But anyways, that was just my 2 cents. Let's get back to the video.
There are accounts of hive tyrants recoiling from the presence of a blank, momentarily cut off from the vast intelligence that gives them purpose. Their alien minds struggling to process the existence of a being that represents the absolute antithesis of the psychic connection that defines their species. The chaos gods themselves, those vast and terrible entities that dwell within the warp and feed upon the psychic energy of mortal beings, regard blanks with something that, or if they were capable of human emotions, might be called fear. A single blank is an irritant to the chaos gods, a tiny cold spot in the vast ocean of psychic energy that sustains them. But the principle that a blank represents, the possibility of a universe without psychic connection, without emotional resonance, without the raw material of souls from which the chaos gods are built, is profoundly threatening. If the pariah gene were to spread through humanity, if every human were to be born without a soul, the chaos gods would starve. Their power would wane, their domains within the warp would contract, and eventually, over the course of eons, they might simply cease to exist. This is, in fact, one of the reasons that some imperial scholars believe the Satan may have engineered the pariah gene in the first place, as a weapon, not merely against individual psychers, but against the warp itself. A genetic time bomb designed to gradually extinguish the psychic fires that feed the chaos gods and their demonic legions. But before we get to the process of how these broken individuals are forged into weapons, we need to understand how the Imperium came to recognize the potential of these strange mutants in the first place. There is a theory, one that is whispered among certain circles of Imperial scholars and Xenos researchers, that the pariah gene is not a natural mutation at all. According to this theory, the gene was deliberately engineered into humanity's distant ancestors by an ancient and terrible intelligence, the Aeldari, whose knowledge of such matters stretches back millions of years, have hinted that the architects of the pariah gene were none other than the Satan, the star gods, the ancient masters of the Necrons. These cosmic predators who waged war against the psychically empowered Old Ones in an era so remote that the very stars have changed position since it ended, supposedly seeded the pariah gene into the primitive hominid population of Old Earth as a long-term weapon against their psychic enemies. The idea was elegant in its cruelty. Create a biological anti-psychic agent within the very species that the Old One's successors would one day encounter, and wait for evolution to do the rest. Whether this theory is true remains a matter of heated debate. The Imperium's own scholars have been unable to confirm or deny it, and the Emperor's prohibition on research into the gene's origins means that the question may never be definitively answered. What is clear, however, is that the pariah gene has been present in humanity for as long as anyone can remember, appearing and disappearing across the generations with the quiet persistence of a genetic time bomb waiting for someone with the will and the resources to detonate it. The Necrons themselves seem to have recognized the utility of the gene. In the ancient past, before their long hibernation in the tomb worlds scattered across the galaxy, the Necrons created warriors called pariahs, cybernetic horrors fashioned from humans who carried the gene. These unfortunate individuals were abducted, stripped of their biological bodies, and encased in the living metal called necrodermis, of their consciousness enslaved to the will of their Necron masters, while their innate anti-psychic abilities were preserved and amplified. The result was a soldier that was devastating against psychers and demons alike, a fusion of ancient technology and stolen biology that represented one of the most insidious weapons in the Necron arsenal. Though these particular constructs have become rare in the current era, their existence speaks to the profound potential of the pariah gene as a weapon of war. It is this potential that the Imperium would eventually learn to exploit, through an organization born in secrecy and baptized in blood, on a mountain that has since vanished from every map. The Shadow Pact, the founding of the Officio Assassinorum. The story of the Culexus temple cannot be told in isolation. It is part of a larger story, one that begins on the slopes of Mount Vengeance on ancient Terra in the early years of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor of Mankind was still walking among his people and the dream of a unified human galaxy had not yet curdled into the nightmare of eternal war. The Great Crusade was a time of unprecedented expansion. Launched from Terra in the late years of the 30th millennium, it was the Emperor's grand project to reunite the scattered remnants of humanity under a single banner, to drive back the aliens and the demons and the petty tyrants who had claimed dominion over human worlds during the long millennia of isolation that followed the catastrophic Age of Strife. At the head of vast fleets and armies, the Emperor and his genetically engineered sons, the Primarchs, swept outward from the Sol system like a cleansing fire, reclaiming world after world for the newborn Imperium. But the Great Crusade was not fought solely on the battlefield. For every world that fell to the might of the Space Marine legions, there were others where a more subtle approach was required. Worlds where the ruling class had to be removed with a surgeon's precision rather than a warrior's hammer. Worlds where a single well-placed death could achieve what an entire campaign of open warfare could not. Worlds where the enemies of the Emperor hid behind layers of deception, surrounded by bodyguards and fortifications and political alliances that made direct military action impractical or impossible. It was for these situations that Malcador, the Sigillite, the regent of Terra, and the Emperor's closest advisor conceived of the Officio Assassinorum. But Malcador was a man of extraordinary intellect and even more extraordinary ruthlessness, a mind that saw the galaxy not as a collection of battles to be won, but as a vast chessboard on which the pieces had to be moved with care and precision. He understood that sometimes the most effective weapon was not a bolter or a chainsword, but a knife in the dark, a drop of poison in a glass of wine, a single bullet fired from a rooftop at precisely the right moment. The founding of the Officio Assassinorum took place in conditions of absolute secrecy. On the heights of Mount Vengeance, Malcador gathered 6 individuals of exceptional skill and deadly purpose, men and women whose identities were hidden even from each other. These 6 became the Directors Primus of the founding clades, each one specializing in a different discipline of the assassin's art. Their names, at least the names they used within the organization, would become legend. Sire Vindicare, master of the marksman's craft. Sires Calidus, the supreme shapeshifter and infiltrator. Sire Eversor, the rage-fueled berserker whose fury was a weapon in itself. Sires Venenum, the poisoner without peer. Sire Vanus, the information broker and strategist whose weapons were data and deduction. And Sire Culexus, whose nature and abilities set him apart from all the others, because his weapon was not a skill that could be learned or a tool that could be forged. His weapon was what he was. Together, these 7 individuals, Malcador and his 6 Directors Primus, swore an oath. They pledged to serve the Emperor in the shadows, aimed to eliminate his enemies by any means necessary, to ensure that no corner of the galaxy was beyond the reach of imperial justice. This was the birth of the Officio Assassinorum, and the names they chose for their clades would be remembered for 10,000 years and more. The founding was kept secret from the Emperor himself, at least initially. Malcador reasoned that the Master of Mankind, who was engaged in the noble and public work of reuniting humanity, should not be tainted by association with the dirty, necessary work of assassination. This was a curious piece of logic, and one that the Emperor apparently found somewhat amusing when he eventually discovered the Officio's existence. The notion that anything could be hidden from a being capable of perceiving the thoughts of every human in the galaxy was, in hindsight, rather optimistic. But the Emperor chose to play along, at least for a time. He allowed the Officio to operate in the shadows, to do the work that needed to be done without the scrutiny of the more idealistic elements of his administration. This arrangement worked well enough until Rogel Dawn, the stoic and uncompromising Primarch of the Imperial Fists, discovered the Officio's existence and was deeply unhappy about it. Dawn was a man of unwavering principle. a warrior who believed in open battle and honest confrontation, and the very concept of state-sanctioned assassination offended him on a fundamental level. He confronted Malcador directly, demanding that the organization be disbanded. Malcador, who was not a man to be intimidated by anyone, even a genetically enhanced demigod, refused. As the standoff was resolved only when the Emperor himself intervened, confirming that the Officio's existence was his will and ordering Dawn to leave them alone, while simultaneously instructing Malcador to bring the organization into the open and subject it to formal rules of engagement. From that point forward, the deployment of an imperial assassin required the formal approval of the Senatorum Imperialis, the council that governed the Imperium in the Emperor's absence. Each clade was established in a secret location, usually on Terra itself, though the precise locations were known only to the highest authorities. Each developed its own traditions, its own training methods, its own philosophy of killing. The Vindicara clade trained its operatives in the art of the long shot, it producing marksmen of almost supernatural accuracy who could wait for days, weeks, even years for the perfect moment to strike. The Kaleidos clade specialized in infiltration and deception, its all-female operatives using the shape-changing drug polymorphine to assume any appearance and penetrate any defense. The Eversaw clade turned its recruits into bio-enhanced berserkers, pumped full of combat stimulants and kept in chemical-induced comas between missions, unleashed only when maximum destruction was required. The Venenum clade refined the art of poisoning to a science so precise that its operatives could kill with substances that no toxicological analysis would ever detect. The Venus clade, perhaps the most unusual of the six, operated primarily through information warfare, using predictive algorithms and intelligence analysis to manipulate events so that their targets were eliminated by seemingly natural causes or by other people entirely. And then there was the Culexus clade. Of all the founding clades, it was the most unusual, the most feared, and the most carefully controlled. Because unlike the other clades, which drew their operatives from the general pool of human talent and enhanced them through training and technology, the Culexus clade required something that could not be manufactured or learned. It required people who were born with the pariah gene, people who carried the void within them from the moment of their first breath. And finding those people in a galaxy of uncounted trillions spread across millions of worlds was a challenge that dwarfed anything the other clades faced. At the birth of the Culexus Temple, forging weapons from the void. The founding of the Culexus clade was, in many ways, the most delicate and dangerous of all the Officio Assassinorum's founding acts. The other clades could draw their recruits from the Schola Progenium, from feral worlds, from the ranks of the Astra Militarum, from any population that produced individuals with the right combination of physical ability, mental resilience, and psychological disposition. But the Culexus clade needed blanks, and blanks were not merely rare. They were actively despised. During the early years of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor's forces were sweeping across the galaxy and bringing world after world into compliance, the existence of psychic blanks was already well known to certain branches of the imperial government. The Sisters of Silence, as that ancient order of female warriors who served as the militant arm of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, were composed entirely of blanks. Their role was to hunt and capture rogue psychers, to oversee the great tithe of psychic individuals from every imperial world, and to crew the sinister black ships that transported those psychers back to Terra for assessment and disposition. The Sisters operated from the Somnus Citadel on Luna, and they were among the Emperor's most trusted servants, walking freely within the inner precincts of the Imperial Palace alongside the golden-armored custodians. But the Sisters of Silence were also a source of considerable anxiety for other branches of the imperial government. When large numbers of blanks were gathered together, yet their combined null aura could produce effects that were deeply alarming to anyone who relied upon psychic abilities. During the Great Crusade, the Sisters transported significant numbers of captured blanks back to Terra, and as these blanks were concentrated in relatively small areas, they began to cast a shadow in the warp. This shadow was powerful enough to interfere with the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that the Emperor projected from Terra to guide humanity's starships through the dangers of warp travel. The implications were staggering. If enough blanks could be gathered in one place, they could potentially blind the entire Imperium, severing the navigational lifeline that held the Emperor's domain together. This realization triggered a wave of paranoia among the psycho-dependent branches of the imperial administration, and calls were made for the identification, isolation, and in some cases outright execution of psychic blanks, framed in the language of public safety and imperial security. The Mechanicum, which had been conducting its own research into the nature of the pariah gene under the direction of its Margos biologists and genitors, came under intense scrutiny. There was talk of shutting down the research programs entirely, of destroying the specimens that had been collected, of ensuring that the dangerous potential of concentrated null fields could never be realized. It was at this critical juncture that Malcador the Sigillite intervened. Working in secret with the Mechanicum, Malcador orchestrated an elaborate deception. The Mechanicum announced publicly that it was ending its pariah research program, and making a great show of closing down its laboratories and executing many of the test subjects. The bureaucrats of the Council of Terra, satisfied that the threat had been dealt with, turned their attention to other matters. But behind the scenes, something very different was happening. The number of executions did not match the number of blanks that had been held in the Mechanicum's laboratories. Many of the most promising specimens had been spirited away, smuggled out of the facilities under cover of darkness, and transported to a specially constructed fortress hidden on Terra, far from the reach of the more zealous branches of the imperial government. It was in this fortress that the Culexus clade was born in its present form. Under the direction of Sire Culexus, the enigmatic Director Primus who would give the clade its name, the rescued blanks were assessed, tested, and evaluated for their potential as anti-psyker operatives. The most powerful among them, those whose null aura was strong enough to incapacitate psykers and disrupt demonic manifestations at significant range, were selected for training. The weaker specimens were retained for breeding programs or support roles, their genetic material carefully preserved and catalogued for future use. Sire Culexus himself remains one of the most mysterious figures in the history of the Officio Assassinorum. Almost nothing is known about his background, his appearance, or his personal history. Even his true name has been lost to time, replaced by the operational designation that would become the name of his clade, and eventually, his temple. What is known is that he was himself a blank of extraordinary power, as a being whose null aura was reportedly strong enough to cause physical illness in anyone who stood too close to him for too long. He was present on Mount Vengeance alongside Malcador and the other 5 Directors Primus, and he swore the same oath to hunt and destroy the enemies of the Emperor, regardless of where or how they sought to hide. The early years of the Culexus clade were marked by experimentation and loss. The process of training a blank to operate as an effective assassin was fraught with difficulties that the other clades simply did not face. A Vindicar recruit could be trained to shoot. A Calidus recruit could be trained to deceive. But a Culexus recruit had to be trained to control an ability that was, by its very nature, uncontrollable. The null aura of a blank is not something that can be turned on and off like a switch, as it is a fundamental aspect of the individual's existence, as constant and as inescapable as their heartbeat. Training a Culexus operative meant not teaching them how to use their abilities, but teaching them how to suppress those abilities sufficiently to function in the proximity of other human beings without driving everyone around them into a state of gibbering terror. This was where the animus speculum came in, but that remarkable piece of technology deserves its own discussion. For now, what matters is understanding the scope of the challenge that Sire Culexus and his successors faced. They were taking individuals who had been rejected by every society they had ever encountered, whose very existence was a source of instinctive revulsion for every living thing around them, as an attempting to forge them into precision instruments of imperial policy. The raw material was powerful but volatile, rare but damaged, deadly but desperately difficult to control. And then there was the question of numbers. Even with the Mechanicum's breeding programs and the Officio's extensive network of scouts and recruiters, the supply of suitable candidates for the Culexus clade was always perilously small. The pariah gene appears in roughly one individual per billion births, and of those individuals, only a fraction possess the gene in its fullest expression, the omega- designation on the psychic assignment scale that indicates an absolute and total absence of warp connection. The rest, those with weaker expressions of the gene who might register as Phi+ or similar intermediate classifications, were useful but not ideal. Yet the Culexus clade wanted the strongest blanks, the purest nulls, the individuals whose void was deep enough and dark enough to swallow the psychic light of the most powerful witches and demons in the galaxy. This scarcity was compounded by the inevitable attrition of the training process itself. Culexus training was not gentle. It could not be, given the nature of the operatives being produced and the nature of the enemies they would face. Recruits were subjected to years of grueling physical conditioning, mental exercises designed to sharpen their focus and deepen their null abilities, and exposure to genuine psychic threats in controlled environments where the margin between success and death was measured in fractions of a second. Many recruits did not survive this process. Some were killed by the training itself, whilst their bodies pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. Others broke under the psychological strain, their already fragile mental health shattered by the demands of a program that required them to confront the very forces that the universe had designed them to oppose. A few were lost to accidents, to equipment failures, to the simple bad luck that haunts any enterprise conducted at the edge of human capability. To compensate for these losses, the Culexus Temple, as the clade came to be known after the formalization of the Officio Assassinorum in the post-heresy era, developed a secondary recruitment method that was as controversial as it was necessary. In addition to hunting down naturally occurring blanks from across the Imperium, the Temple began to vat grow them. Using genetic material harvested from existing blanks and advanced biological techniques developed by the Mechanicum, the Temple's tech adepts attempted to produce artificial blanks in laboratory conditions. This process was arduous and unreliable, yielding only a handful of viable candidates each year, most of whom required years of additional development before they could be considered for operational deployment. But even this meager output was valuable, given the extreme scarcity of natural blanks, and the vat-growing program has continued in one form or another for millennia. The most famous example of a vat-grown Culexus operative is the assassin known as Iota, who served as part of the first execution force during the Horus Heresy. Iota was not born in the conventional sense. She was a replica, a clone grown in a laboratory from cells that had been combined in a test tube by the Emperor's own biologians. She possessed the pariah gene in its fullest expression, an omega- blank, whose null aura was powerful enough to make even her fellow assassins deeply uncomfortable. But she was also, in many ways, even more isolated than a naturally occurring blank. She had no parents, no family, no childhood memories of even the flawed and painful human connections that most blanks experience before their rejection. She was, from the very beginning of her existence, a weapon and nothing more. Iota's story, which we will return to later, illustrates one of the most troubling aspects of the Culexus Temple's existence. These are not soldiers who chose their profession, but they are not warriors who heard the call of duty and answered it willingly. In most cases, they are outcasts who were identified, recruited, and shaped into instruments of death by an organization that valued them solely for their genetic abnormality. The Culexus Temple does not care about the humanity of its operatives. It cares about their utility. And this tension, between the profound loneliness of the blank experience and the cold efficiency of the organization that exploits it, is one of the defining characteristics of the Culexus temple's identity. The temple itself is located in a place that seems almost designed to reinforce this sense of isolation. Unlike the other temples of the Officio Assassinorum, which are situated on Terra itself, the Culexus temple is hidden on a dead moon, a barren rock orbiting a sunless world in the far reaches of the galaxy, beyond the reach of the Astronomicon. This desolate outpost, known as the Fortress of the Soulless, is a place of perpetual darkness and suffocating dread. The combined null aura of all the blanks housed within its armored walls creates an atmosphere so oppressive that even the hardened officials of the Officio Assassinorum find it difficult to visit for extended periods. The fortress lies always beneath a blanket of psychic cold, a chill that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the concentrated absence of spiritual warmth that radiates from its inhabitants. All Culexus assassins are kept within this fortress when they are not on active duty. They are never permitted to leave without the highest levels of authorization, and when they do leave, it is always under heavy security and under a veil of absolute secrecy. The reasons for this are both practical and political. Practically, a Culexus assassin walking through a populated area would cause panic. Their null aura, even when suppressed by the animus speculum, is powerful enough to make nearby people deeply uncomfortable, and the sight of the assassin's skull-faced helm and ghostly movements would attract exactly the kind of attention that an operative of the Officio Assassinorum cannot afford. Politically, the very existence of the Culexus temple is a source of deep unease within the imperial government. The Inquisition's Ordo Sicarius, which was created specifically to monitor and control the Officio Assassinorum, keeps an especially close watch on the Culexus temple, wary of the potential consequences should its operatives ever be turned against the Imperium's own leadership. The governance of the Culexus temple reflects this wariness. While most of the other temples of the Officio Assassinorum are granted a degree of autonomy, with their day-to-day operations managed by experienced Lord Assassins, the Culexus temple is ruled directly by high-ranking officials of the Officio. The current head of the temple holds the title of Director Primus, echoing the founding structure of the original clade, and they answer directly to the Grand Master of Assassins. This tight chain of command ensures that no Culexus operative is ever deployed without the explicit approval of the Officio's senior leadership, and a safeguard that reflects both the power of the operatives themselves and the deep institutional fear that they inspire. There is one more aspect of the Culexus temple's history that deserves mention before we move on to the business of how these assassins are actually made and equipped. It is a story that illustrates, perhaps better than any other, the sheer terror that the Culexus temple inspires in even the most powerful and ancient civilizations in the galaxy. The Aeldari are a species defined by their psychic abilities. Their farseers can see the branching paths of the future. Their warlocks can reshape reality with a thought. Their entire civilization, from the graceful architecture of their craft worlds to the intricate technology of their weapons, is infused with psychic energy at every level. To the Aeldari, or psychic power is not merely a tool, it is the essence of their existence, the medium through which they experience the world and interact with reality. Without it, they would be diminished in ways that a human can barely comprehend. So when the Aeldari learned of the Culexus temple's existence, they did not merely take note. They panicked. Farseer Aladrios Culcassian of Craftworld Alaitok, one of the most powerful seers of his generation, coordinated a centuries-long intelligence operation to locate the Culexus temple and destroy it. Somehow, against all odds, he succeeded in finding the Fortress of the Soulless, penetrating layers of secrecy that had defeated every other attempt at discovery. He dispatched the legacy of Eldanesh, a Shadow-class cruiser, to destroy the fortress and eliminate every blank within it. But then something happened that changed the course of Aeldari history. Using his precognitive abilities, Farseer Culcassian looked forward along the timeline to see the consequences of the temple's destruction. And what he saw horrified him. The destruction of the Culexus temple would set in motion a chain of events that would lead, inexorably, to the annihilation of Craftworld Alitok itself. The specifics of this vision have never been revealed, but the implications are staggering. The Culexus temple, that fortress of dread and darkness, was somehow essential to the survival of one of the largest and most powerful Aeldari craftworlds in the galaxy. Its existence, horrifying as it was to the Aeldari, was preferable to the alternative. Farseer Culcassian recalled the legacy of Eldanesh before it could complete its mission. At Craftworld Alitok survived, and the Culexus temple continued to operate, its existence protected by the very enemy that had the greatest reason to fear it. It is a delicious irony, the kind of cruel cosmic joke that the universe of the 41st millennium seems to specialize in. The Aeldari, masters of fate and seers of the future, looked upon their most terrible enemy and chose to let it live, because the alternative was worse. This, perhaps more than anything else, tells you what kind of weapon the Culexus assassins represent. They are not merely dangerous, they are necessary. In a galaxy where the forces of chaos grow stronger with every passing century, where demonic incursions threaten to tear the Imperium apart from within, where psychers of every species wield powers that can shatter worlds and corrupt entire civilizations, the Culexus assassins are one of the few weapons that the Imperium possesses that can reliably counter these threats. They are the darkness that swallows the flame, the silence that drowns the scream, the void that consumes the light. And the galaxy, in all its grim and terrible wisdom, has decided that they are indispensable. The forging, how a Culexus assassin is made. The process of creating a Culexus assassin begins long before the recruit ever sets foot within the fortress of the soulless. It begins with identification, the painstaking work of finding the vanishingly rare individuals who carry the pariah gene in its fullest expression. The Officio Assassinorum maintains an extensive network of agents and scouts across the Imperium, individuals embedded within planetary governments, Schola Progenium facilities, ecclesiarchy orphanages, and Astra Militarum recruitment centers, all of whom are tasked with watching for the telltale signs of a potential blank. These signs are not always obvious. The most reliable indicator is the instinctive discomfort that blanks provoke in the people around them, but this is a subjective measurement that can easily be attributed to more mundane causes. A child who is avoided by their peers might simply be unpopular. An adult who makes their co-workers uneasy might simply have poor social skills. The Officio's agents are trained to look beyond these surface explanations, to probe deeper, to ask questions that can distinguish a genuinely soulless individual from someone who is merely unpleasant. They carry with them subtle psychic detection devices, instruments calibrated to register the absence of warp presence rather than its amplification, and these devices, combined with the agent's own training and instincts, form the primary tool of identification. When a potential blank is identified, they are brought to the attention of the Culexus Temple's recruiters. These recruiters, who are themselves either low-grade blanks or heavily conditioned individuals, capable of withstanding the discomfort of prolonged proximity to a null field, make the initial assessment. They evaluate the strength of the candidate's null aura, their physical health, their age, their psychological state, and their potential for survival in the temple's training program. Candidates who pass this initial assessment are removed from their previous lives, usually without warning and frequently without consent, and transported to the fortress of the soulless. The journey itself is a trial. The fortress of the soulless lies beyond the reach of the Astronomicon, which means that navigation through the warp is significantly more difficult and dangerous in its vicinity. Ships carrying recruits must rely on pre-calculated routes and conventional navigation methods, a process that is slower and less reliable than standard warp travel. The recruits themselves, who are typically young, frightened, and utterly unprepared for what awaits them, are kept in isolated compartments during the journey, separated from the crew by layers of psychic shielding designed to prevent their null aura from interfering with the ship's systems or the mental health of its personnel. Upon arrival at the fortress, The recruits enter a training regimen that will consume the next several years of their lives. The specifics of Culexus training are among the most closely guarded secrets in the Imperium, but certain broad outlines can be reconstructed from fragmentary sources and the testimony of the rare individuals who have worked alongside Culexus operatives in the field. The first phase of training is focused on physical conditioning. Despite their unique psychic abilities, Culexus assassins are expected to function as elite combatants in every respect. They undergo the same punishing physical regimen as operatives of the other temples, building their bodies to levels of strength, speed, and endurance that far exceed those of a normal human. They are trained in unarmed combat, in close quarters killing techniques, in the art of silent movement and concealment. Their reflexes are honed to a razor's edge, their senses sharpened by a combination of natural ability and subtle bio-augmentation. The second phase focuses on mental conditioning. This is where the Culexus training program diverges most dramatically from those of the other temples. A Vindicar marksman trains to shoot, an Eversaw berserker trains to fight, but a Culexus operative trains to be. The entire purpose of their mental conditioning is to refine and amplify their innate null abilities, to deepen the void within them until it becomes a weapon as reliable and as devastating as any bolt gun or power sword. Through meditation techniques that have been developed and refined over millennia, through exposure to escalating levels of psychic energy in controlled environments, but through exercises that push the boundaries of their null aura and force them to extend its range and intensity, the recruits learn to harness the very thing that has made them outcasts for their entire lives. They learn to project their null field in focused bursts rather than constant emanations. They learn to shape the void around them, directing it at specific targets rather than allowing it to radiate uniformly in all directions. They learn to suppress their null aura when stealth is required, pulling the darkness inward and containing it behind a facade of apparent normality. And they learn, through long and painful practice, to survive the psychological toll that this constant manipulation of their most fundamental nature exacts upon their already fragile minds. Because here is the thing that is often overlooked in discussions of the Culexus assassins. Being a blank is not merely a superpower. It is a condition. It is a way of existing in the world that is fundamentally incompatible with the kind of social connection and emotional warmth that human beings need to remain psychologically healthy. Culexus recruits come to the fortress of the soulless, already bearing the scars of a lifetime of rejection and isolation. The training program does not heal those scars. It deepens them. It takes the loneliness and the alienation that define the blank experience and transforms them into operational assets, reshaping the recruit's psychology so that their isolation becomes a source of strength rather than a source of pain. The result is an operative who is, in many ways, barely human. And some sources suggest that fully trained Culexus assassins may not actually feel emotions in the way that normal humans do. They can mimic emotional responses, reproducing the surface behaviors associated with happiness or anger or grief with mechanical precision. But whether they actually experience these emotions on a subjective level is a question that remains unanswered. They are masters of predictive human behavior, capable of assuming identities and playing roles with the skill of an actor. But beneath the performance, there is only the void. The emptiness that defines their existence extends inward as well as outward, hollowing out the interior landscape of their consciousness until all that remains is purpose, discipline, and the cold, unwavering drive to complete their mission. Now, this is not to say that Culexus assassins are mindless automatons. They are fully autonomous operatives, capable of independent decision-making, tactical improvisation, and the kind of creative problem-solving that no machine could replicate. They possess extensive knowledge of imperial history, organization, and common languages. They can drive everything from armored bikes to small spacecraft. They can disassemble, clean, and reconsecrate their own wargear. They are, in every measurable respect, among the most capable individuals in the Imperium of man. But their capability comes at a cost that few outside the Culexus temple fully understand. And the price is paid in a currency of emotional depth and human connection that most people would consider priceless. Oh, there is one final element of the Culexus training program that deserves mention, and it is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire process. Each Culexus assassin is accompanied in the field by a custodian, a specially trained handler who operates the animus speculum and ensures that the assassin remains under control. The custodian's role is part technician and part warden, a combination of functions that reflects the dual nature of the Culexus operative, a weapon of immense value and a being of immense danger. The custodian activates and deactivates the animus speculum, controls the release of the assassin's null aura, and monitors the operative's psychological state throughout the mission. If the assassin shows signs of instability, if their null field threatens to exceed the parameters established by the mission planners, and if they begin to exhibit behavior that suggests they are losing control of their abilities, the custodian has the authority and the means to shut them down. The existence of the custodian system tells you everything you need to know about how the Officio Assassinorum views its Culexus operatives. They are valued, certainly. They are maintained and deployed with care and precision, but they are also feared, and the precautions taken to ensure their controllability speak to a deep institutional awareness that a Culexus assassin, unshackled and uncontrolled, would be a threat to friend and foe alike. In a universe where the line between weapon and wielder is often blurred beyond recognition, the Culexus assassins occupy a unique and uncomfortable position, too powerful to abandon, too dangerous to trust, and too rare to waste. Instruments of annihilation, the wargear of the Culexus. If the Culexus assassin's null aura is the foundation of their lethality, then their wargear is the architecture that shapes that foundation into a weapon of devastating precision. The technology employed by the Culexus temple is among the most exotic and poorly understood in the Imperium's arsenal, a collection of devices that blur the line between science and sorcery, and whose origins, in some cases, can be traced back to the earliest days of the Great Crusade, or even further into the mists of human antiquity. The most iconic piece of Culexus wargear, and the one that defines the assassin's silhouette on the battlefield, is the animus speculum. This is the skull-faced helm that gives the Culexus their distinctive and terrifying appearance. A closed helmet with a massive lens set into a leering faceplate that resembles nothing so much as the visage of death itself. But the animus speculum is far more than a piece of protective headgear. It is, in many ways, the heart of the Culexus weapon system, the device that transforms a psychic blank from a passive source of discomfort into an active engine of destruction. The animus speculum serves two primary functions. The first is suppression. In its default state, the helm acts as a dampener for the assassin's null aura, containing and muffling the psychic void that radiates from the operative's soulless form. This suppression is never complete. The null aura is too powerful and too fundamental to be entirely contained. But it reduces the effect to a level that allows the assassin to operate in the proximity of other human beings without driving them into blind panic. This is essential for the infiltration phase of most Culexus missions, when the operative must move through populated areas and pass close to guards, civilians, and other individuals who would be incapacitated or driven to flight by the full force of the assassin's null field. Even with the animus speculum active and dampening, most people who encounter a Culexus assassin report feeling deeply unsettled. There is a wrongness to their presence that the helm cannot entirely mask, a crawling sensation that settles into the hindbrain and refuses to leave. But this residual discomfort is manageable, and in the confusion and stress of a combat zone, it can easily be mistaken for the general unease that comes with being in a war. The assassin exploits this, moving through the chaos of battle like a ghost, a figure that the enemy's senses register as present, but that their minds struggle to fully acknowledge. Trying to look directly at a Culexus assassin with the animus speculum active is like trying to focus on a smear in your peripheral vision. You know it is there, But every time you try to fix your gaze upon it, it slides away, leaving only a vague impression of wrongness that your conscious mind is desperate to dismiss. The second function of the animus speculum is amplification. When the mission reaches its critical phase and the assassin closes with their target, the dampening field is reversed. The animus speculum switches from containment to projection, and the full horror of the Culexus assassin's null aura is unleashed upon the battlefield. The effect is immediate and catastrophic, at least for any psyker unfortunate enough to be within range. The suppressive field that had been holding the void in check is replaced by a focusing lens that directs the assassin's anti-psychic energies outward in a concentrated wave of negation. Psykers in the immediate vicinity are racked with agony as their connection to the warp is brutally severed. Their powers fail, their minds fill with static and screaming, and they are left defenseless against the approach of the assassin, who closes the remaining distance with the unhurried inevitability of death itself. But the animus speculum can do more than simply project the assassin's null aura. The grotesque lens set into the helm's faceplate can harvest ambient psychic energy, collecting the warp radiation that psykers bleed into their environment and storing it within the helm's internal coils. When sufficient energy has been accumulated, the animus speculum can release it in focused blasts of what can only be described as negative warp energy, bolts of pure psychic negation that strike the target's mind with the force of a physical blow. The effect on psykers is devastating, often lethal. The effect on non-psykers is less severe, but still deeply unpleasant, disrupting conscious thought and inducing a state of stunned helplessness that leaves the target vulnerable to a killing blow. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the animus speculum's offensive capabilities is the way it becomes more powerful in the presence of psykers. As the more psychic energy there is in the assassin's environment, the more fuel the helm can collect and convert into destructive force. A Culexus assassin deployed against a single rogue psyker is a formidable threat. A Culexus assassin deployed against an entire coven of witches, or a war council of Aeldari farseers, or a formation of Thousand Suns sorcerers, becomes something approaching an apocalyptic force. Their animus speculum, drinking in the psychic output of dozens or hundreds of witches, and channeling it back at them as a hurricane of negation. Beneath the animus speculum, the Culexus assassin wears a garment known as the Sinskin body glove. This is not ordinary clothing. The Sinskin is a sophisticated piece of personal protection that incorporates multiple layers of defensive technology, is each designed to enhance the assassin's survivability and effectiveness in the field. The outermost layer provides physical protection comparable to light power armor, sufficient to absorb the impact of low-caliber weapons and protect against environmental hazards. The intermediate layers incorporate sensor baffles and stealth systems that reduce the assassin's thermal, electromagnetic, and acoustic signatures to near-zero levels. But the most important component of the Sinskin is a technology known as the Imperium, a highly advanced nodal layer built into the garment's inner structure. The Imperium is perhaps the single most mysterious piece of technology in the Culexus arsenal, and its precise mechanism of operation is understood by only a handful of tech priests within the Imperium. But what is known is that the Imperium shifts the wearer's body subtly out of phase with normal reality, creating a state of near intangibility that makes the assassin extraordinarily difficult to target with either conventional or unconventional weapons. When the Imperium is active, the Culexus assassin becomes a ghostly presence on the battlefield, a flickering after-image that seems to exist at the very edge of perception. Ordinary soldiers find their aim thrown off by the assassin's ephemeral appearance, their eyes and targeting systems unable to fully resolve the shifting, translucent figure that drifts toward them through the smoke and chaos of combat. Psychic attacks, which operate through the medium of the warp, pass through the Imperium-clad assassin as though they were targeting empty air. The combination of the null aura and the phase-shifting technology creating a zone of absolute psychic impermeability that no known force in the galaxy can penetrate. Within the Imperium is an integrated system known as the Force Matrix, a network of psychic conduits made from a material similar to that used in the construction of force weapons. The Force Matrix serves as a passive collection system for ambient psychic energy, siphoning off the excess warp radiation that psykers inevitably generate when they tap into the Imperium. This energy is channeled into the animus speculum, supplementing the helm's own collection capabilities and ensuring that the assassin is never without ammunition so long as there are psykers within range. The Force Matrix also provides a secondary layer of psychic defense, while creating a field of negative psychic pressure around the assassin's body that acts as a buffer against the residual effects of nearby warp activity. The final major component of the Culexus arsenal is the Psych-Out grenade. These exotic weapons are used exclusively by the Culexus Temple and the demon hunters of the Ordo Malleus, and their production is among the most closely guarded secrets in the Imperium. Psych-Out grenades contain pressurized canisters of psi-refractive particles, a substance that is produced as a metabolic byproduct of the Emperor's golden throne on Terra. This dust-like material is heavily saturated with negative psychic energy, and when released in the grenade's crackling cloud of particles, it produces effects that are devastating for anyone caught within its radius. For non-psychers, yet the effect of a Psych-Out grenade is disorienting, but not lethal. The psi-refractive particles disrupt normal cognitive function, driving conscious thought from the victim's mind, and leaving them in a state of dazed confusion that makes them easy targets for the assassin. But for psychers, the effect is catastrophic. The negative psychic energy of the particles interacts with the psyker's connection to the warp, fracturing their powers and turning them inward against the psyker's own mind. The result is a psychic implosion, a feedback loop of destructive energy that tears bloody gouges in the psyker's psyche and can, in extreme cases, destroy them entirely from within. The rarity of the substance used to create Psych-Out grenades, combined with the fact that it can only be produced by the Golden Throne, means that these weapons are among the most precious and carefully rationed in the Imperium's arsenal. A Culexus assassin typically carries no more than 3 Psych-Out grenades on any given mission, and each one is treated with the same reverence and care that a normal soldier might reserve for a relic of the Adeptus Ministorum. The deployment of a Psych-Out grenade is never undertaken lightly, and its use is reserved for those moments when the assassin needs to neutralize a particularly powerful psychic threat or create a window of opportunity in a situation where their other weapons are insufficient. Taken together, these pieces of wargear transform the Culexus assassin from a passive psychic blank into an active and overwhelmingly lethal anti-psyker weapons platform. The animus speculum focuses and projects the null aura, turning it from a diffuse field of discomfort into a targeted beam of psychic annihilation. The Imperium makes the assassin nearly impossible to hit, turning them into a phantom that drifts through the battlefield like a bad dream. The Force Matrix ensures a constant supply of energy to fuel the assassin's offensive systems, and the Psych-Out grenades provide a devastating area denial capability that can incapacitate entire squads of psykers in a single blast. But wargear alone does not explain how the Culexus kills. The true art of the Culexus assassin lies not in the technology they carry, but in the way they use it, the patient, methodical, just terrifyingly calm approach that turns every mission into a choreographed dance of death, whose steps have been rehearsed over years of training, and whose conclusion is as certain as the setting of the sun. The approach of the inevitable, how the Culexus hunts. A Culexus assassin does not carry conventional weapons. No bolt pistol rides on their hip. No power sword hangs at their side. No las weapon or plasma gun or melter is slung across their back. This is not an oversight. It is a deliberate design choice that reflects the fundamental nature of the Culexus fighting style. A conventional weapon would be a distraction, a crutch that might tempt the operative to fall back on mundane methods of killing when their unique abilities are precisely what make them irreplaceable. The Culexus assassin kills with what they are, not with what they carry, and the way they approach a target reflects this truth with a kind of terrible elegance. Most Culexus missions follow a similar broad pattern, though the specifics vary according to the nature of the target, the tactical environment, and the strategic objectives defined by the Officio's mission planners. The first phase is always infiltration. The Culexus operative is deployed into the target area by whatever means the situation demands: drop pod, stealth insertion, deep cover placement within an allied military force, or simply walking through the front gate while the guards stare blankly at a patch of empty air that their eyes refuse to focus on. During the infiltration phase, the animus speculum is set to dampening mode. The assassin's null aura is contained, compressed, and held in check by the helm's suppressive systems. The operative moves through the target area like a shadow, a presence that registers on the fringes of awareness but never quite resolves into something tangible. Conventional troops find their attention sliding away from the assassin, their eyes drawn to other things, their minds unconsciously editing the assassin's presence out of their perceptual field. This is not true invisibility, but it is close enough for practical purposes. The combination of the null aura's disquieting effect and the Ethereum's phase-shifting technology creates a zone of cognitive disruption around the assassin that makes them extraordinarily difficult to detect, track, or target. For psychic beings and entities, the situation is different. But where conventional troops experience the Culexus as a vague and easily dismissed source of unease, psychers experience them as something far more profound and far more disturbing. A psyker in the vicinity of a dampened Culexus assassin feels a cold spot in the fabric of the warp, a patch of absolute darkness in the psychic landscape that should not exist and cannot be explained. Some psychers describe the sensation as being aware that something is watching them, but from a place that their witch sight cannot reach. Others describe it as a growing sense of dread, a premonition of annihilation that builds and builds without ever revealing its source. By the time the psyker realizes what is coming, it is often already too late. The second phase of the mission is the approach. Having identified and located the target, the Culexus operative begins to close the distance. This is done with the unhurried patience of a predator that knows its prey cannot escape. The assassin does not rush. There is no frantic charge, no dramatic leap from concealment, no sudden burst of speed designed to catch the target off guard. Instead, the Culexus simply walks, one measured step at a time, moving through the chaos of the battlefield or the corridors of the target's stronghold with the serene inevitability of a force of nature. Guards see them and look away. Sensors detect them and report nothing. Psychic wards flare and die like matches struck in a hurricane. The assassin comes forward, and nothing stops them, because nothing can. As the assassin closes with the target, the effects of their null aura become more pronounced. And even with the animus speculum dampening their field, the compressed null energy radiates outward in waves that grow stronger with proximity. Non-psychers in the assassin's path begin to feel distinctly unwell, their stomachs churning, their thoughts becoming sluggish and confused, their morale draining away like water from a cracked vessel. Psychers fare much worse. The closer the assassin gets, the more their powers diminish, their connection to the warp fraying and thinning like a rope being cut one strand at a time. A psyker who is unlucky enough to be directly in the assassin's path may lose consciousness entirely, their mind shutting down in a desperate attempt to escape the psychic annihilation that approaches with every step. The third phase is the kill. When the Culexus operative has closed to within striking distance of their target, the dampening field is reversed. The animus speculum switches from suppression to amplification, and the full, unrestrained power of the assassin's null aura is unleashed. For anyone within range, the effect is immediate and overwhelming. The air itself seems to thicken, to grow heavy with a cold that has nothing to do with temperature. Lights flicker and dim, voices become muffled and distorted. The fabric of reality seems to stretch and groan, as though the universe itself is recoiling from the concentrated absence that the assassin represents. For the target, assuming they are a psyker or a psychically attuned being, the experience is one of absolute soul-crushing horror. Their connection to the warp is not merely severed, it is devoured. The null aura falls upon their psychic abilities, like a weight upon a candle flame, crushing them down to nothing. Their powers, which may have sustained them through centuries of battle and study, simply cease to function. Their witch sight goes dark, their telekinetic grip fails, their precognitive awareness winks out like a candle in a gale. They are left blind, deaf, and utterly helpless before the advance of the assassin, who moves in for the kill with the cold efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. The killing blow itself can take many forms. The Culexus may use their animus speculum to deliver a concentrated blast of negative warp energy, a bolt of pure psychic negation that strikes the target's mind with enough force to reduce their brain to inert tissue. They may use their bare hands, pressing their palms against the target's flesh and allowing their null aura to do the work, draining the target's life force through direct contact until the spark of consciousness is extinguished. They may use psych-out grenades to shatter the target's psychic defenses before closing for a final, decisive strike. In extreme cases, against particularly powerful targets, the Culexus may simply stand close enough to the target for long enough that their null aura overwhelms the target's ability to sustain their own existence, a slow and terrible death by spiritual asphyxiation. Against demons, the Culexus killing method is even more straightforward. A demon is a creature of pure warp energy, and a consciousness given form by the psychic substrate of the Imperium and sustained in real space only so long as it maintains a connection to that substrate. In the presence of a Culexus assassin, that connection is cut. The demon's form begins to unravel, its substance bleeding away like smoke in a strong wind. Against lesser demons, the effect can be almost instantaneous, the creature simply dissolving into wisps of fading energy as its connection to the warp is nullified. Against greater demons and more powerful entities, the process takes longer and may require the assassin to actively focus their null aura through the animus speculum, directing concentrated blasts of negation at the demon's core until its binding to real space is thoroughly and irrevocably destroyed. There is another dimension to the Culexus killing method that deserves attention, one that is less often discussed but no less significant. The Culexus assassin can kill with their bare hands. Not through physical force, though their extensive training in unarmed combat makes them formidable in close quarters, but through the direct application of their null aura at point-blank range. When a Culexus assassin places their hands upon a living being, the physical contact creates a direct conduit for their null field, allowing it to flood into the target's body without the attenuation that normally occurs across distance. The effect is described in imperial records as life-draining, and the terminology is more literal than metaphorical. The null aura of the Culexus does not merely disrupt the target's psychic connection to the warp. At the point of contact, it extinguishes the target's soul entirely, snuffing out the tiny flame of psychic presence that defines their existence as a sentient being. The target does not merely die. They are erased, their consciousness annihilated, their spiritual footprint in the warp reduced to nothing. It is a death that leaves no echo, no trace, no after-image in the Imperium. For a species that believes in an afterlife, for a culture that is built upon the assumption that the soul persists beyond the death of the body, this is a fate that is arguably worse than mere physical destruction. The Culexus does not merely kill, it unmakes. This capability has profound implications for certain enemies of the Imperium. The Eldari, for example, rely upon their spirit stones to capture their souls at the moment of death, protecting them from being consumed by the chaos god Slanesh. An Eldari killed by a Culexus assassin has no soul to capture. The spirit stone remains empty, and the Eldari's consciousness is simply gone, not consumed by Slaanesh, not preserved in the infinity circuit, but annihilated entirely. For a species that lives in constant fear of spiritual predation, this is perhaps the most terrifying form of death imaginable. Not the eternal torment that Slaanesh promises, but something arguably worse: nothingness. Complete, irreversible, absolute nothingness. The psychological effect of this capability upon potential targets cannot be overstated. Enemy leaders who learn that a Culexus assassin has been deployed against them do not merely take additional precautions. They panic. The knowledge that an invisible, unstoppable, soul-destroying killer is somewhere in their vicinity, moving inexorably toward them through defenses that it treats as non-existent, is enough to shatter the composure of even the most hardened commanders. This psychological warfare is, in many ways, as valuable as the assassin's actual killing ability. A target who is consumed by fear is a target who makes mistakes, who diverts resources to defense that might otherwise be used offensively, who become so focused on the threat they cannot see that they become blind to the threats they can. What makes the Culexus hunting method so terrifying is not merely its effectiveness, it is its inevitability. A target can run from a Vindicar marksman, they can hide from a Calidus infiltrator, they can fight an Eversaw berserker, but they cannot escape a Culexus assassin, because the Culexus does not hunt with speed or strength or cunning. The Culexus hunts with absence. They are the void that swallows light, the silence that drowns sound, the cold that devours warmth. There is nothing to fight, because the Culexus is not bringing anything to the confrontation. They are taking everything away, and against an enemy that removes the very tools you would use to defend yourself, there is no defense. There is only the slow, certain approach of the inevitable and the growing, screaming certainty that nothing you do will make any difference at all. Harbingers of silence, notable Culexus missions, and named assassins. The history of the Culexus temple is, by design, almost entirely hidden. The Officio Assassinorum operates under a blanket of secrecy so comprehensive that even the most well-connected members of the imperial aristocracy rarely learn more than vague rumors about the organization's activities. For the Culexus temple, this secrecy is even more pronounced, reflecting the combination of institutional paranoia and genuine operational necessity that has defined the temple since its founding. Nevertheless, fragments of information have survived, scattered across the historical record like shards of a broken mirror, each one offering a brief, distorted glimpse of the Culexus assassins at work. Perhaps the earliest documented deployment of a Culexus operative in a major military operation occurred during the Horus Heresy, that cataclysmic civil war that tore the Imperium apart in the early years of the 31st millennium. When the War Master Horus declared his rebellion against the Emperor, the leadership of the Officio Assassinorum recognized almost immediately that conventional military force alone would not be sufficient to end the conflict. Horus was a primarch, a being of almost godlike power, surrounded by entire legions of genetically enhanced warriors and protected by the dark blessings of the Chaos Gods. To reach him would require the deployment of the Officio's most capable operatives, working together in a way that had never been attempted before. The result was the first execution force, a team of 6 assassins drawn from each of the Officio's founding clades. This unprecedented joint operation was authorized by Malcador the Sigillite himself and coordinated by Constantine Valdor, the Captain General of the Legio Custodes. The team included Aristide Kell of the Vindicar clade, a sniper of phenomenal skill, Coin of the Calidus clade, a shapeshifter whose original gender had been lost beneath layers of polymorphine-induced transformation, the Garantine of the Eversaw clade, a rage-fueled berserker of almost uncontrollable ferocity, Jenica Soalm of the Venenum clade, a poison expert whose growing spiritual awareness would eventually put her at odds with the rest of the team, Fon Tariel of the Vanus clade, an information specialist whose strategic acumen guided the mission's planning, and Iota of the Culexus clade. Iota was, in many ways, the most fascinating, and the most tragic member of the execution force. As a vat-grown clone, she lacked even the minimal human connections that most blanks experienced before their recruitment. Just she was created for a single purpose, to be a weapon, and her entire existence had been shaped by that purpose. She was described as indifferent and aloof, a being who observed the world around her with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying specimens in a laboratory. She could mimic human emotions when the situation required it, producing the appropriate facial expressions and vocal patterns with mechanical precision. But beneath the performance, there was only the void. She did not form bonds. She did not experience loyalty or friendship or love. She simply was, a walking null field in human form, deployed against whatever target the Officio deemed worthy of her attention. The execution force was deployed to the world of Dagonet, but where intelligence indicated that Horus would soon arrive to pacify the planet's rebellious population. The plan was ambitious, but straightforward. Lure the War Master into a trap, isolate him from his bodyguard, and eliminate him with a coordinated strike from multiple angles. But the plan was complicated by the existence of a parallel assassination plot, one directed not at Horus, but at the Emperor himself. A creature known as Spear, a black pariah whose abilities had been corrupted and amplified by the dark rituals of the word-bearer's chaplain Erebus, had been dispatched to assassinate the master of mankind, using a drop of the Emperor's own blood as a psychic targeting mechanism. Spear was an aberration, a Culexus experiment gone horribly wrong. He was the result of the Temple's attempt to create a black pariah, a being of such extraordinary null power that he could overwhelm even the most powerful psychers with a thought. The experiment had failed, or rather, it had succeeded too well. Spear possessed null abilities that far exceeded those of any conventional Culexus operative, but those abilities had been twisted and perverted by chaos, transformed into something that was neither truly blank nor truly psychic, but something altogether new and terrible. He could absorb the genetic material of anyone he killed, assuming their form and their abilities in a grotesque parody of the Calidus shape-shifting technique. He was a predator without conscience, without restraint, and without any of the controls that the Culexus Temple had so carefully built into its other operatives. Iota encountered Spear on Dagonet, and what followed was one of the most extraordinary confrontations in the history of the Officio Assassinorum. When the Millennium assassin Soam separated from the execution force to pursue her own spiritual calling among the people of Dagonet, Iota followed her, drawn by a curiosity that her cold exterior could not entirely mask. The two assassins soon encountered Spear, and recognizing the dire threat he represented, they attacked. The battle was brief but devastating. Soam was mortally wounded in the opening exchange. Iota unleashed the full power of her animus speculum, directing her null aura at Spear with an intensity that should have destroyed him outright. For a moment, it seemed as though she had gained the upper hand. Her anti-psychic abilities, honed by years of training and amplified by the animus speculum's focusing lens, tore at the fabric of Spear's corrupted existence. But Spear was not an ordinary opponent. In the moment of their struggle, he managed to sample a drop of Iota's spilled blood. This gave him access to her genetic template, and with it, her own pariah abilities. Using his stolen powers, Spear reflected Iota's attack back upon her, turning the assassin's own null aura against her with devastating force. Iota was destroyed, consumed by the very power that had defined her existence. She died as she had lived, alone, weaponized, and ultimately expendable. The mission to assassinate Horus failed. The execution force discovered, too late, that the figure who teleported down to Dagonet's capital was not the War Master at all, but a decoy, Luke Sederai, at one of Horus's trusted captains. In retaliation for the assassination attempt, Horus ordered an orbital bombardment of the planet. Only the Vindicar assassin Aristadekel survived the operation, escaping Dagonet with his life, but not his mission objective. The Horus heresy continued for years afterward, culminating in the Siege of Terror and the Emperor's final, fateful confrontation with his wayward son. Iota's story is not the only notable chapter in the history of the Culexus Temple. Across the long millennia that followed the heresy, individual Culexus operatives have carried out missions that have shaped the course of galactic history, even if most of those missions remain hidden behind layers of classification and institutional secrecy. In the year 990 of the 32nd millennium, roughly 1,000 years after the end of the heresy, a Culexus assassin named Drainos was deployed against the chaos sorcerer Xantaka. This was a mission that illustrated the unique capabilities of the Culexus with remarkable clarity. Xantaka was a powerful practitioner of the dark arts, a sorcerer whose mastery of warp energy had allowed him to conjure entire legions of demons from the Imperium. He was protected by layers of psychic wards, by armies of summoned fiends, and by a bodyguard of rubric marines, the enchanted automatons who served the Thousand Suns traitor legion. Any conventional assault on Xantaka's position would have required a significant military commitment, with casualties measured in the thousands or tens of thousands. Drainos required no army. He simply walked through Xantaka's defenses. The demons that guarded the sorcerer's stronghold could not perceive him, or to their warp-born senses, which perceived the world primarily through the medium of the immaterium, Drainos was invisible, a moving patch of absolute emptiness that their consciousness slid over without registering. The rubric marines, those hollow suits of armor animated by the bound spirits of long-dead sorcerers, were equally blind to his presence. Their enchanted perceptions, dependent entirely on psychic energy for function, simply could not process the existence of a being who represented the antithesis of everything they were. Drainos walked through their ranks as casually as a man walking through an empty field. He approached Xantaka without being challenged, without being detected, without a single alarm being raised. And when he was close enough, he activated his animus speculum and burned the sorcerer's brain to ash with a single blast of negative psychic energy. The mission was over in minutes. A threat that might have required an entire crusade to eliminate was neutralized by a single operative walking in through the front door. This is the power of the Culexus assassin, and this is why the Imperium guards its supply of psychic blanks so jealously. Nearly 9,000 years later, in the year 290 of the 41st millennium, another Culexus operative demonstrated a different aspect of the temple's capabilities. The Culexus assassin Vadrex was deployed against the Chaos Lord Malfecius, an obscenely powerful servant of the Dark Gods, who had eluded previous assassination attempts by operatives of the Eversor and Vindicar temples. Where the Eversor's berserker fury and the Vindicar's marksmanship had failed, the Officio turned to the one temple whose abilities could not be defended against with conventional means. Vadrex's mission was not a quick kill. It was a hunt, a patient, methodical stalking that carried the assassin across the Eye of Terror itself, that vast and terrible region of space where the material universe and the warp overlap in a perpetual storm of demonic energy. For months or years, Vadrex shadowed Malfecius, waiting for the moment when the Chaos Lord's nature would make him vulnerable to the Culexus's unique capabilities. That moment came when Malfecius achieved the dark apotheosis that many servants of chaos aspire to, ascension to demon princehood. For most enemies, the transformation of a Chaos Lord into a demon prince would have made the target infinitely more dangerous and correspondingly harder to kill. But for a Culexus assassin, the equation was reversed. As a mortal being, Malfecius had possessed at least some degree of resistance to the null aura, his physical body providing a buffer between his consciousness and the assassin's devastating anti-psychic field. But as a demon prince, Malfecius was now a being of pure warp energy, his existence sustained entirely by his connection to the immaterium. He had become, in the most literal sense, the perfect target for a Culexus operative. Vadrex struck with devastating precision. Psych-out grenades shattered the nascent demon prince's psychic defenses, and the negative energy of the Emperor's own golden throne disrupting the warp bindings that held Malpheus's new form together. Before the reeling demon prince could recover, Vadrex followed up with a punishing series of blasts from the animus speculum, each bolt of negative warp energy tearing chunks of substance from Malpheus's rapidly dissolving form. The demon prince, who had defeated Eversaw berserkers and eluded Vindicar marksmen, was destroyed in moments, his existence snuffed out by the one weapon in the Imperium's arsenal that was specifically designed to kill beings of his nature. The lesson of Vadrex's mission is clear. The more powerful a psyker or warp entity becomes, the more vulnerable it becomes to the Culexus assassin. This is the paradox at the heart of the Culexus fighting style. As strength in the warp is weakness before the void. The mightier the witch, the more completely they are consumed by the assassin's negation. It is a dynamic that inverts the normal rules of combat, where greater power typically means greater survivability. Against a Culexus assassin, greater power means a bigger target and a more spectacular destruction. Another mission that deserves special attention took place in the year 353 of the 41st Millennium, and it involved a threat that was unusual even by the standards of a galaxy in which demonic invasions and psychic catastrophes are depressingly commonplace. The Weird Vein Psykers of the 122nd Vostroyan Firstborn, a regiment of the Astra Militarum, came through a particularly turbulent warp translation as something more than they had been before. The psychic stresses of the journey had fused their individual consciousnesses into a single gestalt entity, a collective mind of terrifying psychic power that bore no resemblance to the individual soldiers who had entered the warp. This dread gestalt reveled in its new abilities, rising up against its former comrades and enslaving the entire regiment to its bloodthirsty will. When the regiment arrived on the world of Sylvanus II, it set about the systematic murder of the planetary population. The Imperium's response was to deploy a Culexus assassin known only as the Revoker. The Revoker's mission was complicated by the fact that the dread gestalt was not a single individual, but a collective, a networked consciousness distributed across multiple physical bodies. Destroying one body would not eliminate the gestalt, and any more than cutting a single strand from a spider's web would bring the entire structure crashing down. The Revoker needed to neutralize the gestalt's psychic coherence, to sever the connections that bound the individual minds together, and reduce the collective back to its component parts. The details of how the Revoker accomplished this are fragmentary, but the result is well documented. The presence of a single Culexus assassin was sufficient to reduce the dread gestalt's terrifying psychic power to the level of a newborn infant. The null aura of the Revoker disrupted the psychic bonds that held the collective together, fraying and dissolving the connections between the individual minds until the gestalt simply fell apart, its component personalities collapsing back into their original separate states. And without the gestalt's unifying consciousness, the enslaved soldiers of the 122nd were freed from its control, and the threat to Sylvanus II was eliminated. This mission is particularly significant because it demonstrates that the Culexus assassin's abilities are not limited to the elimination of individual targets. The null aura is a field effect, a zone of psychic negation that affects everything within its range. Any psychic phenomenon, any warp-based power, any connection between mind and immaterium that falls within the assassin's sphere of influence is subject to disruption and potential destruction. This makes the Culexus assassin effective not only against individual psykers and demons, but against psychic phenomena of any kind: warp storms, psychic shockwaves, telepathic networks, precognitive shields, telekinetic barriers, and any other manifestation of psychic power that an enemy might deploy. Perhaps the most politically significant Culexus mission in recent Imperial history was the assassination of Aunva, the ethereal supreme of the Tau Empire. This operation took place during the Second Agrellan Campaign, a major Imperial counteroffensive against the Tau following their Third Sphere expansion. During the campaign, Aunva became trapped within a hidden command bunker on the contested world of Agrellan Prime, unable to escape due to an Imperial blockade that had sealed the system. When the Officio Assassinorum learned of the Ethereal Supreme's location, it dispatched a full execution force to the system, with individual operatives from multiple temples targeting various high-value Tau commanders. What Commander Farsight and Commander Shadowsun were targeted by operatives from other temples. Aunva was targeted by a Culexus. The choice of a Culexus assassin for this particular mission might seem counterintuitive. The Tau are not a psychic species. Their ethereal caste does not wield warp-based powers, and the Tau have no significant connection to the Imperium. So why send the Imperium's specialist anti-psyker operative against a target who is not a psyker? The answer lies in the Culexus's secondary capabilities, the ones that go beyond mere psychic negation. The Tau may not be psychic, but they rely heavily on technology, on sensors, on artificial intelligence, and on the precise coordination of their military forces through electronic communications networks. The Culexus assassins' Ethereum-enhanced stealth capabilities made them practically invisible to the Tau's technological detection systems, which were designed to identify physical threats through conventional means and were ill-equipped to cope with a being whose very existence defied conventional perception. The null aura, while unable to disrupt psychic powers that the Tau did not possess, still produced a profound sense of unease in every living creature within range, including the Tau themselves. And the animus speculum, while most devastating against psychers, was still capable of delivering lethal force to non-psychic targets through focused blasts of negative energy. The Culexus assassin slipped into Aunva's bunker like a phantom, passing through layers of security that had been designed to stop physical intruders. But the Tau guards felt the assassin's presence as a deep, inexplicable dread, a cold certainty that something terrible was approaching. But their senses showed nothing, and their training had not prepared them for an enemy they could not see, could not hear, and could not shoot. When the assassin finally revealed itself, bursting through a bulkhead door into Aunva's inner sanctum, the result was swift and brutal. The Ethereal Supreme's bodyguards were cut down in moments. Aunva himself attempted to flee, his ancient hover drone carrying him through the corridors of the bunker in a desperate bid for escape. But the drone malfunctioned, whether from the proximity of the assassin's null field or from simple mechanical failure, and Aunva was forced to continue on foot, his aged limbs no match for the assassin's relentless pursuit. The death of Aunva was neither swift nor merciful. The sources are sparse on the details, but they suggest that the Culexus took its time, whether out of cruelty, out of operational necessity, or out of the cold, mechanical thoroughness that characterizes all Culexus operations. When it was over, the Ethereal Supreme of the Tau Empire was dead, and the political consequences of his death rippled outward through Tau society like shockwaves from an earthquake. The Tau, recognizing that the loss of their spiritual leader would be devastating to morale, covered up Aunva's death entirely. They replaced him with holographic simulations, artificial intelligence facsimiles, encoded with his thought patterns and speech patterns, sophisticated enough to fool the Tau populace into believing that their Ethereal Supreme still lived. As it was a desperate deception, born of a crisis that a single Culexus assassin had created, and it stands as a testament to the strategic impact that these rare operatives can have when deployed against targets whose importance transcends the merely military. Kindred spirits and rival shadows. The Culexus in the wider Imperium. The Culexus assassins do not exist in isolation. They are part of a broader ecosystem of anti-psychic assets that the Imperium has developed over the course of its long and bloody history, and understanding their place within that ecosystem helps to illuminate both their unique strengths and their limitations. The most obvious point of comparison is with the Sisters of Silence, that ancient order of female warriors who share the Culexus assassin's fundamental nature as psychic blanks. And the Sisters of Silence were founded during the Great Crusade, predating the Officio Assassinorum by some years. and their original purpose was to hunt and apprehend rogue psykers across the expanding Imperium. Like the Culexus assassins, the Sisters are composed entirely of individuals who carry the pariah gene, and like the Culexus, they exploit their null aura as a weapon against psychic threats. But the similarities between the two organizations end at the level of fundamental biology. In virtually every other respect, the Sisters of Silence and the Culexus assassins are profoundly different organizations with profoundly different philosophies, methods, and operational doctrines. The Sisters of Silence are soldiers. They operate in organized units, carry conventional weapons, and fight as part of larger military formations. Their null aura is used primarily as a defensive tool, creating zones of psychic suppression that protect allied forces from enemy witchcraft and provide a stable platform from which conventional weapons can be brought to bear against psychically empowered foes. During the Great Crusade, the Sisters fought alongside the Space Marine legions, most notably during the assault on Prospero, where their null aura provided crucial protection against the psychic attacks of the defending Thousand Sons. They were a military force in the traditional sense, organized into chambers and vigils, led by officers who held ranks and titles, fighting in formations that would have been recognizable to any military theorist. The Culexus assassins, by contrast, are not soldiers at all. They are solo operatives, deployed individually against specific targets, operating without support and without the safety net of a military formation. Where the Sisters use their null aura as a shield, the Culexus uses it as a sword. Where the Sisters suppress psychic activity across a broad area, creating a general dampening field that affects everyone within range, the Culexus focuses and concentrates their null aura into a devastating weapon that can be directed at individual targets with lethal precision. Where the Sisters carry bolters and power swords and fight in the thick of conventional combat, the Culexus carries no weapons at all, relying entirely on their innate abilities and their specialized wargear to accomplish their objectives. The relationship between the two organizations has been one of mutual awareness but minimal collaboration. Both the Sisters of Silence and the Culexus Temple draw from the same vanishingly small pool of psychic blanks, and there are occasional tensions between the two organizations over the allocation of this precious resource. A promising blank identified on a remote Imperial world might be claimed by either organization, depending on which one's recruiters reach the individual first. In practice, the Sisters tend to recruit younger candidates, adolescents and children who can be trained within the Sisterhood's established structures, while the Culexus Temple tends to seek out older individuals whose null aura has had time to mature and develop to its fullest potential. The Sisters of Silence also have a much more public role within the Imperium than the Culexus Temple. And following their near extinction after the Horus Heresy and their long period of obscurity during the intervening millennia, the Sisters were restored to prominence by Reboot Guilliman after his resurrection in the early 42nd millennium. Guilliman issued the Dispensatus Anathema, ordering that the scattered remnants of the Sisterhood be gathered, reorganized, and expanded. The result was a significant increase in the Sisters' numbers and operational capability, with new vigils established in every segmentum and Sisters deployed as part of the Indomitus Crusade. In the current era, the Sisters of Silence are a visible and recognized military force, their role in defending the Imperium against psychic threats publicly acknowledged and officially sanctioned. The Culexus Temple, by contrast, remains in the shadows. Its existence is not publicly known, its operatives are never seen outside of their missions, and its activities are classified at the highest levels of Imperial security. This secrecy is not merely a matter of operational security. It reflects a fundamental philosophical difference between the two organizations. The Sisters of Silence are warriors who happen to be blanks. The Culexus assassins are blanks who have been weaponized. The distinction is subtle but important, and it shapes every aspect of the two organizations' cultures, methods, and self-concepts. Within the Officio Assassinorum itself, the Culexus Temple occupies a unique position. It is both the most feared and the most restricted of the major temples, viewed with a combination of awe and deep unease by even the Officio's senior leadership. The other three major temples are the Vindicar, the Calidus, and the Eversaw. Each specialize in a particular method of killing, but their operatives are, at the end of the day, recognizably human. They are enhanced, augmented, and trained to levels that far exceed the normal human baseline. But they are still people, possessing personalities, motivations, and emotional responses that their handlers can understand and predict. The Culexus assassins are something else entirely. Their soullessness, their emotional blankness, their fundamental alienness, all of these qualities make them deeply unsettling to work with and deeply difficult to trust. Each of the other major temples brings a different set of capabilities to the Officio's arsenal, and understanding those capabilities helps to clarify the specific niche that the Culexus fills. The Vindicar Temple produces the galaxy's finest marksmen, operatives who can hit a target at almost inconceivable range with a single, precisely placed shot. One famous Vindicar is said to have remained motionless at his firing position for 6 full years, waiting for his target to present itself, and when the moment finally came, he made the kill in less than half a second. The Vindicar's strength is precision. One shot, one kill, no collateral damage. But the Vindicar requires a clear line of sight and a target that can be killed by a bullet, however exotic that bullet might be. Against a target who is protected by psychic shields, who can foresee the shot before it is fired, or who exists partially in the warp, the Vindicar is at a significant disadvantage. The Calidus Temple produces infiltrators and shapeshifters, operatives who use the drug polymorphine to alter their physical appearance and assume the identity of anyone they choose. A Calidus assassin can spend months or years embedded within a target's inner circle, gradually working their way into a position of trust before striking at the moment of maximum vulnerability. The Calidus's strength is deception. The target never sees the kill coming because the killer has been standing next to them the entire time, wearing the face of a trusted friend or servant. But the Calidus requires time to establish their cover identity, and against targets who are psychically aware, the deception may not hold. A powerful psyker might sense the wrongness of a Calidus's disguise through witch sight, penetrating the polymorphine mask and exposing the assassin before they can strike. The Eversaw Temple produces the most outwardly violent operatives in the Officio's arsenal, berserkers who are kept in chemical-induced comas between missions and unleashed in a frenzy of bio-enhanced destruction when maximum carnage is required. An Eversaw assassin does not infiltrate, does not deceive, and does not wait for the perfect moment. An Eversaw assassin is dropped into the target area and kills everything that moves until the target is dead, the mission is complete, or the assassin's own body gives out under the strain of the combat stimulants that fuel their rampage. The Eversaw's strength is overwhelming force. No bodyguard is numerous enough, no fortress secure enough, no defense strong enough to withstand the hurricane of violence that an Eversaw brings to bear. But the Eversaw is fundamentally a blunt instrument, incapable of subtlety, incapable of restraint, and just as vulnerable to psychic attack as any other mortal combatant. The Culexus fills the gap that none of these other temples can address. When the target is a psyker, when the threat is psychic in nature, when the defenses that protect the target are woven from warp energy and sustained by dark sorcery, the Culexus is the only tool in the Officio's arsenal that is specifically designed for the job. A Vindicar's bullet might fail to penetrate a psychic shield. A Calidus's disguise might be pierced by witch sight. An Eversaw's fury might be turned aside by telekinetic force or redirected by precognitive awareness. But a Culexus assassin negates all of these defenses simply by existing. Their presence strips away the psychic protections that might otherwise render a target invulnerable, thus leaving them exposed and defenseless before the assassin's approach. This is why the Culexus Temple despite producing far fewer operatives than any of the other major temples, is considered one of the most strategically important assets in the Imperium's arsenal. In an era when the forces of chaos grow ever stronger, when demonic incursions threaten world after world, when the Great Rift has torn the galaxy in two and allowed the energies of the warp to bleed into real space on a scale not seen since the days of the Horus Heresy, the need for anti-psychic weapons has never been greater. The Sisters of Silence can hold the line. The Grey Knights can purge the taint. But when a specific psyker needs to die, when a particular demon needs to be banished, when a precise surgical strike is required against a target that conventional forces cannot reach, the Culexus assassin is the Imperium's weapon of last resort. And yet, for all their power, for all their strategic importance, the Culexus assassins remain the loneliest beings in the galaxy. They live in darkness, sleep in silence, and wake to the knowledge that every mission they undertake is likely to be their last meaningful interaction with another living being. They are feared by their allies, hated by their enemies, and pitied by no one. They are the void that the Imperium has learned to wield, the darkness that it has learned to aim, the absence that it has learned to deploy as a weapon of war. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And in the darkest corners of that war, where the enemies of humanity wield powers that threaten to unmake reality itself, the Culexus assassins walk in silence. They do not seek glory. They do not seek recognition. They do not seek the kind of redemption or purpose or meaning that other warriors find in their service to the Emperor. They simply do what they were made to do. They approach, they negate, they destroy. And then they return to the darkness, to the fortress of the soulless, to the cold and echoing halls where the other blanks wait between missions, each one a weapon without a wielder, a tool without a purpose, a soul without a spark. They are the rarest assassins in the Imperium. They are the most feared operatives in the Officio Assassinorum. They are the living proof that, in a universe defined by psychic energy and spiritual connection, yes, the most dangerous thing of all is the thing that has none. That which is unknown and unseen always commands the greatest fear. That is the maxim of the Culexus Temple. And in the 41st millennium and beyond, in a galaxy where the gods themselves walk the battlefield and the dead do not always rest, that maxim has never been more true. Thank you so much for listening tonight. If you enjoyed this journey through the lore of the Culexus assassins, please consider leaving a like on this video and subscribing to the channel. Every like and every subscription helps bring more content like this to your feed, and it means the world to me that you choose to spend your time here. There is so much more to explore in the universe of the 41st millennium, and I look forward to exploring it with you. Until next time, rest well. Oh, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there are some things more terrifying than the monsters in the warp. The most terrifying thing of all is the silence that swallows them.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.